The history of the British Museum. Discover in this video the key moments and hidden stories that have defined the British Museum. From its founding in 1753 to its transformation in the digital era, each step of its history is a window into a fascinating world of culture, controversy, and change. Chapter 1. Foundation and First Collections. The British Museum was conceived in 1753, a time marked by an intense interest in exploration and collecting. The museum's founding was largely due to the will of Sir Hans Sloane, a notable physician and scientist of his time. Sloane had amassed a vast and varied collection of objects throughout his life, encompassing an astonishing range of natural specimens, cultural artifacts, and rare books. At the end of his life, he proposed that his extensive collection be preserved for the public, leading to the creation of the British Museum. This action ensured the preservation of his collection and laid the foundation for what would become one of the world's most important cultural institutions. In its early years, the British Museum could best be described as a cabinet of curiosities, a place where rare and exotic objects were displayed more for their rarity or beauty than for any kind of order or scientific classification. Early visitors to the museum marveled at the diversity of the displayed objects, from fossils and Egyptian mummies to botanical samples and artifacts from distant civilizations. This presentation reflected the mindset of the time, one in which the collection of rare and unique objects was valued for its ability to inspire awe and curiosity. The museum initially reflected the era's desire for knowledge and exploration. In the 18th century, Europe was in the midst of an age of discovery and conquest. Collectors like Sloane were central figures in this era, often financing expeditions to distant lands or purchasing items from returning travelers. The British Museum became a place where the fruits of these expeditions could be displayed, not only for the delight and education of the elite but also as a symbol of the reach and power of the British Empire. The museum's early collections were primarily composed of Sloane's collected items, but they soon expanded. Sloane's donation included more than 71,000 objects, including over 40,000 books, 7,000 manuscripts, an extensive collection of natural history, and curiosities from around the world. These initial items provided a solid foundation for the museum's future growth and helped establish its reputation as a center of learning and discovery. The way these collections were organized and presented to the public began to change slowly, reflecting a movement toward a more scientific and orderly understanding of the world. Chapter 2. The Age of Enlightenment. By the late 18th century, the British Museum began to transform from a mere repository of curiosities to a center of knowledge and education, reflecting the ideals of the Enlightenment. This period, characterized by an emphasis on reason, scientific knowledge, and the spread of learning, profoundly influenced the museum's evolution. The museum's administration adopted a more systematic and educational approach to presenting its collections, aligning with the era's growing thirst for knowledge and spirit of inquiry. The organization of the collections became more methodical, with increasing attention to their historical and cultural relevance rather than simply displaying them for their rarity or exoticism. In this era, the museum strove to educate and foster global understanding. Efforts were made to make the collections accessible to a broader public beyond the educated elite and aristocracy. Exhibitions were organized in a way that provided an educational view of the world, presenting artifacts and specimens in a way that revealed their historical and cultural contexts. This was a reflection of the enlightened ideals of sharing knowledge and promoting education as a public good. Public lectures and written guides began to be introduced, providing visitors with deeper, more contextual information about the collections. The museum's impact during the Age of Enlightenment extended beyond its walls. It became a model for other cultural and educational institutions, both in Britain and abroad. The idea that knowledge and learning should be accessible to the public, not just a selected few, began to take root. Additionally, the museum played a crucial role in the development and dissemination of new knowledge in areas such as archaeology, anthropology, and natural history, contributing significantly to the academic and scientific advancement of the time. During this period, the museum continued to expand its collections, often thanks to the contributions of explorers and scholars. The objects brought from all over the world not only provided a testimony of the past but also allowed contemporaries a glimpse into distant cultures and civilizations. This expansion reflected British society's growing global interest, fueling both the intellectual appetite and the imagination of the public. The British Museum, during the Age of Enlightenment, preserved the past and helped shape the cultural and educational present. Chapter 3. Acquisition of the Rosetta Stone. The acquisition of the Rosetta Stone by the British Museum in 1802 marked a crucial milestone in the institution's history and in the fields of linguistics and Egyptology. The stone, discovered in 1799 by French soldiers in Egypt, was ceded to the British following Napoleon's defeat in Egypt. This artifact, dated to 196 BC, contains a decree inscribed in 3 different scripts: Egyptian hieroglyphics, Demotic, and Ancient Greek. The importance of this discovery was not lost on academics of the time, who quickly realized it could be the key to deciphering the enigmatic Egyptian hieroglyphs, a language that had remained indecipherable for centuries. The Rosetta Stone became the focus of intense study. The Greek text, which was understandable to contemporary scholars, provided a basis for comparing and eventually deciphering the other 2 texts. In 1822, the French scholar Jean-François Champollion announced that he had succeeded in deciphering the hieroglyphs using the stone as a guide. This achievement opened a new world of knowledge, allowing historians and archaeologists to begin understanding the vast history and culture of ancient Egypt. The Rosetta Stone was not just an archaeological treasure but also a linguistic bridge that connected the present with an inaccessible past until then. The presence of the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum attracted visitors and scholars from around the world, significantly increasing its status as one of the leading cultural and educational institutions. The stone symbolized not just success in decoding the past but also humanity's ability to unravel the deepest mysteries through persistence and study. Additionally, this discovery stimulated renewed interest in Egyptology, leading to new expeditions and discoveries in Egypt. The museum, through its custody of the Rosetta Stone, firmly established itself as an epicenter of historical and archaeological research. Chapter 4. Victorian Expansion. During the Victorian era, the British Museum experienced an unprecedented period of expansion, both in terms of its collections and its physical infrastructure. This time, characterized by British imperialism and a profound interest in the study of the human past, was fertile ground for enriching the museum. Artifacts from across the British Empire and beyond arrived in ever-increasing quantities, extending the boundaries of knowledge available at the museum. These artifacts included not only pieces of great historical and artistic value but also objects that offered insight into the everyday lives and cultural practices of various peoples. Parallel to the growth of the collections, the 19th century witnessed significant changes in the infrastructure of the British Museum. The original building was no longer sufficient to house the growing collection, leading to a series of expansions and renovations. The most notable was the construction of the current building, designed by Sir Robert Smirke, begun in 1823 and largely completed by the mid-century. The neoclassical design of the new building reflected not just the aesthetic taste of the time but also a desire to symbolize the permanence, order, and power of the British Empire. This physical expansion of the museum not only allowed more collections to be housed but also offered more appropriate space for their display and study. The Victorian era marked a time when the British Museum became a clear reflection of the power and reach of the British Empire. The acquisition of artifacts from different parts of the world was carried out in a context of exploration, conquest, and colonization. The museum, during this time, was not just a place of preservation and study but also a showcase of the might and diversity of the empire. This imperial approach to the acquisition and exhibition of artifacts was both a source of national pride and a subject of criticism and debate, particularly regarding the circumstances of how some of these collections were obtained. Moreover, the Victorian era witnessed the development of new areas of study and academic disciplines. Archaeology, anthropology, and Egyptology, among others, greatly benefited from the museum's collections. The artifacts provided key material for research and study, and the museum became an important center for academics in these and other disciplines. This era consolidated the British Museum's reputation as one of the world's most important cultural and educational institutions, a place where the past was preserved, studied, and exhibited for the benefit of global knowledge. Chapter 5. The Debate over Cultural Ownership. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the British Museum found itself at the center of a growing debate over cultural ownership and the ethics of artifact acquisition. During this period, public and academic criticism began to question the legitimacy of how some of the museum's most famous collections had been obtained. A case in point was that of the Elgin marbles, a collection of sculptures and reliefs from the Parthenon in Athens that had been brought to Great Britain in the early 19th century by Lord Elgin. While some argued that these artifacts had been saved and preserved for global enjoyment and study, others saw their acquisition as an act of cultural plunder and a symbol of European colonialism and imperialism. The debate widened to include not only the methods of acquisition but also the issue of restitution of cultural objects to their countries of origin. Cultural activists, governments of affected countries, and some academic circles began demanding the return of artifacts, arguing that they were an essential part of the cultural and historical heritage of their nations. This debate raised complex questions about ownership, cultural identity, and historical responsibility, putting museums like the British Museum in a delicate position, balancing their educational and conservation missions with growing ethical and political pressures. This controversy had a significant impact on the British Museum's acquisition and exhibition policies. It began to adopt more rigorous procedures for acquiring new pieces, paying closer attention to their provenance and the ethical issues involved. Additionally, the museum endeavored to present its collections in a way that recognized and respected their original cultural and historical contexts. However, the debate over cultural ownership and restitution was not easily resolved and continued to be a topic of discussion and conflict both within and outside the academic and museum worlds. This period marked an era of reflection and reconsideration for the British Museum and other similar institutions. Historical practices of collecting were questioned, and there was a broader debate about ethics in the management of cultural heritage. The discussion about the Elgin marbles and other similar artifacts highlighted the complexity of the relationship between museums, history, colonization, and culture. This debate, far from being a closed issue, continued to evolve and become part of a broader dialogue about the role and responsibility of museums in the 21st century. Chapter 6. Survival during World War II, 1939 to 1945. During World War II, the British Museum faced unprecedented challenges in protecting its immense and valuable collection. Facing the imminent threat of bombings in London, the museum's administration took extraordinary measures to safeguard the artifacts. This included evacuating key pieces to safe locations outside the city and, in some cases, out of the country. Objects of incalculable historical and cultural value were meticulously packed and transported to places like mines, castles, and country houses, selected for their safety and appropriate environmental conditions. This logistical operation, carried out under conditions of great uncertainty and risk, demonstrated the museum's commitment to the preservation of global cultural heritage. Despite the risks, the British Museum did not close entirely during the war. Although much of its space and resources were repurposed for war efforts, such as housing government offices, parts of the museum remained open to the public when circumstances allowed. This decision was a symbol of resistance and determination, reflecting the belief in the importance of culture and education, even in times of crisis. The exhibitions that remained open offered Londoners a sense of continuity and normality amid the chaos of war, serving as both a physical and spiritual refuge. The experience of World War II left an indelible mark on the British Museum. The need to protect the collections during times of conflict led to the development of advanced conservation and security strategies and techniques, many of which remained relevant long after the war. Additionally, the war highlighted the fragility and invaluable nature of cultural heritage, reinforcing the museum's mission to preserve and educate. The success of protecting its collections during this turbulent period was not only a technical and organizational achievement but also a powerful testament to the role of museums as guardians of human culture and history in the most difficult moments. Chapter 7: The Era of Archaeological Discovery. Participation in archaeological excavations. In the 20th century, the British Museum not only continued to be a custodian of historical artifacts but also played an active role in archaeological research and discovery. The museum participated in numerous archaeological expeditions, some of which led to groundbreaking discoveries. These expeditions were not limited to locations within the traditional reach of the British Empire but spanned various locations worldwide. Through these excavations, the museum played a crucial role in expanding historical and archaeological knowledge, significantly contributing to the study and understanding of ancient civilizations. Among the most notable findings in which the British Museum was involved are those in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece. Each of these discoveries not only added new pieces to the already impressive museum collection but also provided invaluable insights into ancient societies. For example, excavations in Mesopotamia unearthed artifacts that offered a unique view of the earliest urban civilizations. Similarly, explorations in Egypt shed light on lesser-known aspects of Egyptian life and culture. These discoveries captivated the public's imagination and propelled advances in archaeological methods and conservation techniques. The British Museum collaborated closely with universities, research institutions, and other museums on these expeditions. This collaboration allowed for an exchange of knowledge and experiences, fostering an environment in which archaeology could develop as a more rigorous and methodical scientific discipline. Moreover, the expeditions provided training opportunities for emerging archaeologists, ensuring the transfer of knowledge and skills to new generations of researchers. The museum's involvement in 20th-century archaeology had a profound cultural and educational impact. Exhibitions based on these new findings attracted a wider and more diverse audience interested in learning more about the human past. These discoveries enriched the museum's collections and contributed to a greater understanding of human history, often challenging and refining existing narratives. The era of archaeological discovery underscored the vital role of the British Museum as a center of research and learning, further consolidating its status as one of the world's leading cultural institutions. Chapter 8: Modernization and Change. Between the 1970s and 1990s, the British Museum faced the challenge of adapting to changing cultural expectations and technological advances. This period was characterized by renewed interest in making museums more accessible and interactive for the public. The British Museum responded by introducing more dynamic and educational exhibitions, designed not only to display its collections but also to tell stories and provide richer historical and cultural contexts. Greater emphasis was placed on visitor participation, with the introduction of interactive exhibits and educational programs aimed at attracting a wider and more diverse audience, including families and students. During this time, the museum also expanded its educational reach. Special programs for schools were developed, and education-oriented activities increased. These initiatives sought not only to enrich the visitor experience but also to make the museum a valuable educational resource for the community. Efforts were also made to ensure that the collections were more accessible to researchers and academics through the improvement of research facilities and the expansion of the museum's libraries and archives. The advancement of technology during this period also had a significant impact on the museum's operations. The digitization of collections and archives began to gain importance, allowing for greater preservation and easier access to materials by researchers worldwide. Additionally, The use of multimedia and digital technologies in exhibitions started to become more common, offering new ways to interpret and present the collections to an increasingly tech-savvy public. Along with these internal changes, the museum also experienced a modernization of its physical facilities. Renovations and improvements were carried out in various galleries and public spaces, enhancing accessibility and the visitor experience. These changes reflected the museum's commitment to keeping up with contemporary expectations and remaining relevant in a rapidly evolving society. The modernization of the British Museum during the 1970s and 1990s marked a significant period of transition, paving the way for future developments in the new millennium. Chapter 9: The Great Court of Queen Elizabeth II. The year 2000 marked a milestone in the history of the British Museum with the inauguration of the Great Court of Queen Elizabeth II, the largest covered space of its kind in Europe at that time. This impressive structure, designed by British architect Norman Foster, represents a fusion of classical and contemporary, symbolizing the museum's evolution into the 21st century. The court not only added a spectacular architectural space to the museum but also redefined the visitor experience, providing a central reception and meeting area that enhances navigability and access to the different galleries. The design of the Great Court reflects a balance between respect for historical heritage and the adoption of modernity. The glass and steel structure is erected over the museum's former courtyard, creating a visual dialogue between the existing neoclassical architecture and the new contemporary forms. This innovative addition has enhanced the museum's aesthetics and significantly increased its public and functional space. The court houses the King George III Library, a circular reading room that has become an icon of knowledge and learning while preserving an important historical legacy. The opening of the Great Court transformed how visitors interact with the museum. This space serves not only as an impressive entrance point but also offers areas for temporary exhibitions, events, and educational programs. The inclusion of new facilities, such as cafes and shops, has enhanced visitor comfort and enjoyment, making the museum a more welcoming and attractive place. The court also symbolizes the museum's transition from a space primarily for storing artifacts to a lively and dynamic cultural center focused on interaction and engagement with the public. The creation of the Great Court of Queen Elizabeth II represented not only a physical renewal but also a conceptual rebirth of the British Museum. It symbolizes a new era in which the museum not only preserves and exhibits the past but also serves as a space for meeting, learning, and debate. This development has been fundamental in redefining the museum's role in the 21st century, marking its ongoing evolution as an institution that balances tradition with innovation and heritage with modernity. Chapter 10: The Digital Age and Sustainability. Currently, the British Museum faces the challenges and opportunities of the digital age, adapting to new ways in which the public interacts with culture and knowledge. The digitization of the collections has been a priority, allowing historical artifacts and documents to be accessible online to a global audience. This effort expands the museum's reach and facilitates academic research and personal learning, democratizing access to information. Additionally, the museum has integrated interactive and multimedia technologies into its exhibitions, enhancing the educational experience and allowing visitors to interact more deeply with the collections. In line with contemporary concerns about sustainability and environmental impact, the British Museum has taken steps to reduce its carbon footprint and promote sustainable practices in its operations. This includes everything from efficient resource management to incorporating sustainability criteria into exhibition planning and events. Simultaneously, the museum has focused efforts on being more inclusive, ensuring that its collections and programs are accessible and relevant to a diverse audience, regardless of their origin, ability, or economic situation. The British Museum continues to explore ways to evolve and respond to the challenges of a globalized and digitally connected society. Its focus on digitization, international collaboration, sustainability, and inclusion are key aspects of its mission to be a truly modern and responsible museum. The digital age and the growing importance of addressing issues of sustainability and cultural restitution pose challenges for the museum and offer opportunities to reinvent itself and continue its relevant role in cultivating and preserving global cultural and educational heritage.